I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
You might ask, who are the Freedom Riders? Well, let me sum it up in a brief explanation. The Freedom Riders were civil rights activists, mainly students, who rode interstate buses into the southern United States to test the segregation laws. They mainly did this to test the Supreme Court case Boynton against Virginia. This case overturned an African American law student for trespassing by being in a restaurant and a bus terminal which was meant for whites only. The first Freedom Ride began on May 4th, 1961, that started in Washington, D.C., and planned to arrive in New Orleans on May 17th, 1961. 7 blacks and 6 whites left on 2 interstate buses on this date. The rides were sponsored by CORE, or the Congress of Racial Equality. They knew the rides were going to be some trouble to them, but they never really thought it was going to be as bad as it actually did happen. Buses were burned and riders were jailed.
I will never forget Anniston.
Anniston, Alabama, the place where Hank Thomas nearly died. In 1961, Thomas was a 19-year-old Freedom Rider, one of 7 blacks and 6 whites who boarded buses bound for the South to protest segregated interstate travel.
Were you frightened?
I'm 19 years old. You don't know enough to be afraid.
But that changed on May 14th. When the riders arrived in Anniston, they were met by a brutal mob which shattered windows, punctured the tires of the bus, and set it on fire.
They held the door, and I remember them saying, let's burn them alive.
Trapped, Thomas says he sought the easiest way to die.
I thought that if I breathed in the smoke, then I would simply go to sleep, and that's the way I was going to die.
Charles Person, an electronics technician for the Atlantic Public Schools, was one of the Freedom Riders. His personal interview stated, when we left Washington, D.C., it was to test the faculties as we moved south. And that was to test everything. The restrooms, the counters, the shoe shine polish, and any other facility the bus stations offered. We were to test. The white patrons, Freedom Riders, would go into the colored facilities, while we would go into the facilities marked for white. This worked quite well when we stopped. We started at Washington, D.C. on May 4th. I was almost arrested in Charlotte, North Carolina for trying to get a shoe shine. Helen O'Neill, an English instructor at Wilberforce University, became involved in the civil rights movement. In her interview, she talked about her getting arrested on the bus ride home. The reason that I'm a Freedom Rider, though I didn't get on a bus, I was arraigned with the Freedom Riders. They had this big arraignment and all the Freedom Riders came back and I was arraigned with that group. After that, I was getting ready to go to Clarksdale, must have been Labor Day. I was sitting on the second seat of the bus and I was arrested. I was just riding the Greyhound bus home, not demonstrating. I was arrested, taken to jail, and kept there all day. And after dark, I was brought back out. There were these policemen. They all had their pistols, and some of them had on plain clothes. Their pistols were very much in view. They were swaggering. They stood in front of the doors. I was just standing there, waiting to get on the bus. When we could get on the bus, there was a young black man that came on, and we sat on the second seat, same seat that I had been arrested on when we were going home. I testified about that in a hearing in Jackson, Mississippi, with Constance Motley, the attorney, and Darren Bell. I guess the testimony was so that the federal government would enforce the Boynton decision. That's how I became involved with the civil rights movement, which continued for a time after that. As you can see, the Freedom Riders went through a lot just to test these simple segregation laws and try and end it. But without their brave and courageous acts, segregation might have been around still today.
An oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today